He was once the most famous Native American on television, but his real story was nothing like the legend. Behind Jay Silverheels' stoic portrayal of Tonto in The Lone Ranger was a man fighting Hollywood's stereotypes, racism, and personal pain. While audiences saw a loyal sidekick, Silverheels was battling to reclaim dignity for himself and his people. Decades later, the truth about his life and legacy is finally coming to light, and it's far more powerful than the show ever revealed. Among Jay Silverheels fans, very few actually know this fact. Although he became a household name through his portrayal of Tonto on The Lone Ranger, the fame that came with that role was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, he broke barriers as one of the first Native American actors to achieve mainstream recognition on American television. On the other hand, his success came at the cost of creative freedom and personal dignity, as Hollywood at the time refused to see him as anything beyond the limited, stereotypical roles available to Native performers. Before acting, he had been a talented athlete and boxer, even earning acclaim as a lacrosse player. His physical presence and charisma helped him land small film roles in the 1930s and 1940s, often under his birth name. However, as Hollywood's fascination with Westerns grew, producers began casting him exclusively in roles that fit their narrow, often patronizing vision of Indigenous identity. When The Lone Ranger premiered in 1949, Silverheels' portrayal of Tonto brought him instant fame. He was proud to bring a Native character to television audiences, but the way that character was written reflected Hollywood's deep-rooted racism. Tonto was often treated as the loyal servant, speaking in broken English and existing primarily to assist the white hero. While Silverheels imbued the role with as much dignity as he could, he was acutely aware of its limitations. He reportedly pushed the show's writers to give Tonto more depth and intelligence, but those efforts were largely ignored. Off-screen, Silverheels struggled to find meaningful work after The Lone Ranger ended in 1957. Despite his fame, he was rarely offered substantial roles. Casting directors often told him outright that audiences would not accept a Native American in a leading part. Even when he did find work, it was typically as nameless warriors, scouts, or Indians meant to be defeated by white protagonists. The industry's systemic discrimination left him typecast and underpaid for decades. The situation was made worse by the irony that Silverheels had become so associated with Tonto that he could not escape the shadow of the role. His image was endlessly recycled for reruns, comic books, and merchandise, but he received little compensation or recognition for the cultural phenomenon he helped create. Many Native activists and scholars later argued that Silverheels' situation symbolized the painful contradiction faced by Indigenous performers, celebrated on screen as symbols, but denied real respect behind the scenes. In addition, producers often told Silverheels, sometimes bluntly, that audiences would not accept him outside the context of The Lone Ranger. Casting directors typecast him in a narrow range of characters: scouts, warriors, nameless tribesmen, or villains meant to oppose white protagonists. Despite his talent and charisma, he was rarely given speaking parts of depth or emotional nuance. As one critic later observed, Tonto followed him wherever he went. That professional stagnation became a defining struggle of his later life. The problem went deeper than personal frustration. Silverheels' experience reflected the broader reality of racial discrimination in Hollywood during the mid-20th century. Minority actors, especially Native Americans, African Americans, and Asian Americans, were routinely confined to supporting or caricatured roles that reinforced harmful stereotypes. For Silverheels, who had worked tirelessly to bring dignity to his character, this was a bitter irony. He had hoped that Tonto's popularity would open doors for Native performers. Instead, it reinforced Hollywood's comfort with a single, simplified image of Indigenous people. Still, Silverheels refused to be defeated by the system. In the 1960s, he took it upon himself to create opportunities for others, co-founding the Indian Actors Workshop in Los Angeles. The program trained native actors and advocated for more accurate portrayals in film and television. He became a mentor to younger generations, urging them to learn their craft, demand respect, and tell their own stories. His advocacy was ahead of its time, predating the native rights movement's full cultural impact by nearly a decade. Even as his career languished, Silverheels continued to appear occasionally in films and television shows, often parodying or referencing his old role. In appearances on programs like The Tonight Show and The Brady Bunch Hour, he showed a self-deprecating sense of humor, poking fun at his own typecasting while subtly criticizing the industry that had confined him. Beneath the humor, though, was a quiet sadness, a recognition that Hollywood had failed to evolve in his lifetime. Away from the bright lights of Hollywood, J. Silverheels found his greatest peace and fulfillment in the quiet rhythm of the countryside. A lifelong lover of animals and open spaces, he devoted much of his spare time to raising, breeding, and racing standard-bred horses. This passion, which dated back to his youth on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, reflected a different side of the man most people only knew as Tonto, a man deeply connected to the land, to hard work, and to the traditions of his Mohawk heritage. Silverheels' interest in horses was not a hobby born from fame. It was part of who he was, long before Hollywood discovered him. Growing up on the reserve, he learned to ride at a young age and became known for his athleticism, grace, and command over animals. Those skills later helped him in his acting career, particularly in the Western genre, where horseback riding was essential. But while many of his co-stars viewed riding as a job requirement, Silverheels approached it as something spiritual, a partnership between rider and horse built on mutual respect. When the Lone Ranger brought him fame and financial stability, Silverheels invested his earnings into a small horse breeding and racing operation in California. He raised and trained standard-bred horses, a breed known for its strength and stamina, often used in harness racing. He was a familiar face at local racetracks, where he blended in easily among trainers and breeders, far removed from the Hollywood spotlight. Those who met him there described him as quiet but good-natured, with a dry sense of humor that sometimes surfaced in his remarks about his television fame. One story that captured his wit came when a reporter asked if he had ever considered entering Tonto's paint horse, Scout, in a race. Silverheels laughed and replied, "Heck, I can outrun Scout." The line perfectly encapsulated his personality, humble, self-aware, and never taking the myth of Tonto too seriously. Though he respected what the character represented to many fans, he never lost sight of the fact that it was, at its core, a Hollywood creation. The real J. Silverheels lived a far more grounded and authentic life, one that revolved around family, heritage, and the steady beat of hooves on dirt. Silverheels was married twice and the proud father of 6 children. From his first marriage, he had a son named Steve, and from his second, another son, J. Anthony Silverheels Jr., along with 4 daughters, Marilyn, Gail, Pamela, and Karen. His second wife, Mary DeRoma, stood by him during the most challenging years of his life, especially as his health declined in the 1970s. His family often described him as a devoted, if reserved, father, a man who taught through example rather than lectures. His daughter Marilyn Silverheels followed in his footsteps, becoming an actress and advocate for Indigenous issues, while his son, J. Anthony Jr., also pursued acting, honoring the family's connection to the screen. Yet despite the fame surrounding their father, Silverheels kept his home life private. He valued simplicity, preferring long days spent working with his horses over attending Hollywood events or chasing celebrity recognition. Reportedly, in the mid-1970s, J. Silverheels faced one of the most devastating chapters of his life. After decades of struggling against Hollywood's racism and the limitations of his fame as Tonto, his health began to deteriorate rapidly. Multiple reliable sources agree that around 1975 or 1976, Silverheels suffered a series of major strokes, though the exact year varies slightly among accounts. These strokes left him partially paralyzed, robbing him of his mobility and ability to continue acting. For a man who had built his career on physical strength, athleticism, and presence, the impact was crushing both professionally and emotionally. Before his illness, Silverheels had remained active in Hollywood, taking on small roles and mentoring younger native actors. He was a familiar and respected figure on sets, known for his quiet dignity and dry humor. But after the strokes, his speech and motor functions were severely affected, effectively ending his career. Once an athlete and performer who moved with power and grace, he now required daily assistance. For someone so fiercely independent, the transition was heartbreaking. The strokes also came at a time when the entertainment industry was finally beginning to evolve. Native American actors were starting to gain small but significant ground, and the conversation around authentic Indigenous representation was growing louder. Silverheels, who had been a pioneer in that fight, could no longer take part in it the way he once had. Still, he continued to serve as a symbolic figure of strength and perseverance within the native acting community. Friends and fellow performers often visited him, later recalling his enduring wit and pride despite his physical decline. His health battles also placed a heavy strain on his family. Silverheels had been married twice and was the father of several children, including his daughter Marilyn, who followed in his footsteps to become an actress and activist. They stood by him during those difficult years as he underwent long periods of rehabilitation and medical treatment. Unfortunately, the damage from his strokes was irreversible. Though he occasionally appeared in public, most notably in tributes and charity events honoring his work, he never fully regained his strength. In 1979, just a year before his death, Silverheels was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a long-overdue recognition of his contributions to the industry. However, by then he was already in frail health and unable to attend many public ceremonies. The Hollywood that had once typecast and marginalized him was finally beginning to acknowledge his legacy. But for Silverheels, that acknowledgement came painfully late. On March 5, 1980, Jay Silverheels passed away in Calabasas, California, after suffering another massive stroke. He was 67 years old. His death marked the end of a life defined by both triumph and struggle, a man who broke through barriers but bore the weight of prejudice and neglect from an industry that profited from his image while offering him little in return. In the decades since Jay Silverheels' passing, historians and researchers have often noted a subtle yet telling injustice that accompanied his legacy: the inconsistencies and inaccuracies in how his life was recorded. Unlike many of his white Hollywood contemporaries whose biographies were meticulously documented and preserved, public records about Silverheels' early life and final years remain riddled with conflicting details. Even something as fundamental as his age at death varies across reputable obituaries and archives, a reflection of how mid-20th century journalism often treated Indigenous public figures not as full individuals, but as curiosities existing at the fringes of mainstream culture. When Silverheels died in 1980, newspapers across the United States and Canada ran obituaries celebrating his portrayal of Tonto and his role as a pioneering native actor. Yet many of these accounts contained factual discrepancies. Some listed his age as 62, others 67 or 68. Certain reports placed his birth year in 1912, while others claimed 1919 or 1920-1917. Even official records from Hollywood and government archives differ slightly on where and when he was born, some citing Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve in Ontario, others listing nearby Brantford. Though these inconsistencies may seem minor, they reflect a deeper pattern of erasure and neglect that Indigenous figures in entertainment routinely faced. At the time, journalists rarely took the same care in verifying details about Native actors as they did with their white peers. Reporters often relied on second-hand studio press materials, which were notoriously inaccurate and sometimes deliberately altered for marketing purposes. Publicists might adjust an actor's age to make them seem younger or change birthplace information to suit a more romantic image. In Silverheels' case, the combination of limited record-keeping on the reserve and Hollywood's casual racism meant that the truth of his personal history was treated as malleable. This lack of precision extended beyond mere numbers. It shaped how his story was told. Obituaries tended to reduce his life to the shorthand of the Indian sidekick, offering few details about his activism, his athletic achievements, or his work with the Indian Actors Workshop. Many papers described him only in terms of his service to the Lone Ranger, with little acknowledgement of the cultural weight he carried as one of the first Native American actors to achieve national fame. Even in death, the media coverage mirrored the limitations he had faced in life. Respect tinged with condescension, recognition without full understanding. Later biographers and Native scholars have worked to correct these omissions. Through interviews with family members and archival research, they've helped establish a clearer timeline. Harold J. Smith, later known as J. Silverheels, was born in 1912 on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, the son of a respected Mohawk chief. These modern efforts not only honor his memory, but also underscore how systemic bias once shaped historical record-keeping. For many Indigenous entertainers of Silverheels' generation, their legacies were filtered through a colonial lens that prized novelty over accuracy. The inconsistencies surrounding his final years, the varying reports of his age, his declining health, and even the place of his death, may seem like small errors, but they reveal something much larger. They speak to an era when Native performers were visible on screen yet invisible in documentation, admired as characters, but not fully regarded as people. What do you think about J. Silverheels' secrets? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.